Did you know that Max Verstappen is just 1 point away from being suspended from Formula One? And not only that, this crisis could change his career forever. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Max deserves this potential suspension? So, what's really going on inside Red Bull and F1? In this video, we'll break down everything about Max Verstappen's dire situation, the 11 points on his super license, the tension at Red Bull, and how this could affect the 2025 championship. Max Verstappen is not only the most dominant driver of recent years, but also a figure who has redefined what it means to compete at the limit in Formula One. With 4 world titles under his belt and a reputation forged through raw talent, surgical aggression, and unwavering confidence, the Dutchman has been the competitive heart of Red Bull. However, the 2025 season has put him in an unexpected position, one that no one, not even his detractors, imagined seeing so soon. Currently, Verstappen has 11 points on his super license and is just 1 away from receiving an automatic suspension. This is no exaggeration. It's a scenario as critical as it is unprecedented for a world champion in the throes of dominance. To understand the magnitude of this situation, one must consider how the penalty point system works in Formula One. Since its implementation in 2014, this mechanism seeks to curb dangerous driving through a cumulative point count that, upon reaching 12, forces the driver to miss a race. In more than a decade, only 2 drivers have been suspended for this reason: Romain Grosjean in 2012, before the current system, but under a similar principle, and Kevin Magnussen in 2024. Verstappen, a name that represents excellence and control under pressure, is now dangerously close to joining that small and dishonorable group. The accumulation of these points has not been the product of a single error, but the result of a series of risky decisions in moments of high tension. From blocks deemed dangerous to direct incidents with other drivers for which the stewards have found him primarily responsible, each penalty has been a brick in the wall that now threatens to keep him out. The most alarming thing is that this pattern doesn't seem random. On the contrary, it shows a clear trend. In situations where the pressure is on, Verstappen tends to push beyond the limit, seeking to maintain his advantage without giving up an inch. This attitude has led him to glory, but also to the brink of the most serious penalty possible. This season has also brought with it a significant shift in external perception. What was once considered an aggressive style is now under much stricter scrutiny. F1 has toughened its stance on safety and on-track behavior, and Verstappen, with his track record, has become the perfect case study. Red Bull, accustomed to protecting him tooth and nail, now seems torn between backing up his winning instinct and taking internal measures to avoid a sporting disaster. It's no longer just about winning races. It's about surviving them without crossing an invisible line that can completely change the course of the championship. All of this makes Verstappen the central protagonist of a tense, unpredictable, and deeply human narrative. We're watching a champion struggle not against other drivers, but against the limits of the system that made him a champion. And the most interesting thing is that this fight is just beginning. Amid the tension surrounding Max Verstappen, rumors have begun to gain unusual momentum, to the point that they are no longer just isolated speculation, but narratives that are beginning to seep into the internal dynamics of Red Bull and into the analysis of experts within the paddock. One of the episodes that marked a turning point this season was the Spanish Grand Prix. There, Verstappen was involved in an incident that many consider the most serious in recent years, not because of the magnitude of the crash itself, but because of the strategic implications it exposed. The attempt to overtake George Russell at turn 4 after prior contact with Leclerc ended in a direct collision. Although the images didn't show a brutal maneuver, the telemetry was clear. There was a loss of grip on the rear left tire, causing understeer and taking the Red Bull directly into the Mercedes. The result: 3 points on the super license and a new shadow over his season. But what's truly striking is how this episode unleashed a chain of reactions within the Formula One community. While the stewards officially sanctioned him for being primarily responsible, rumors began to emerge within the paddock about a possible lack of control in Verstappen's decision-making. Some analysts, such as Peter Windsor, pointed out a clear pattern to his penalties. Most occur in the second half of races, when physical exhaustion, mental fatigue, and the pressure to maintain positions create the perfect setting for errors in judgment. This not only fueled debate in specialized media but also opened the door to a series of deeper interpretations. Is Verstappen losing the coolness that once made him unbeatable? Or is he simply trapped in a system that no longer tolerates his aggressive style? As the controversy grew, leaks began to circulate from within the Red Bull team. Several British and German media outlets reported that, after the Spanish GP, private meetings were held between the team's technical leadership and Verstappen, focusing exclusively on risk management and a review of the incident with Russell. What was previously unthinkable, placing their star driver under internal review, is now an undeniable reality. Furthermore, Helmut Marko, the team's senior advisor and one of Max's staunchest defenders, broke with the official line and openly declared that it had been a serious error of judgment and that there are no excuses for losing points in this way. This statement, far from being a superficial criticism, revealed a crack in the absolute confidence that Red Bull had maintained in its driver. A crack that could widen if Verstappen doesn't adjust his on-track behavior in the short term. Meanwhile, other teams have begun to interpret the situation as an opportunity. From McLaren to Ferrari to Mercedes, the statements have been cautious but revealing. Oscar Piastri was blunt in saying that every point counts and that they could benefit from any absence. Toto Wolff, more diplomatic, simply emphasized the importance of fair play, while Ferrari's Fred Vasseur called for consistency in sanctions. Everyone is watching with surgical precision, observing the Dutch driver's every move, aware that a possible suspension could completely change the championship landscape. In this game of pressure and interpretation, rumors not only fuel uncertainty but are already having a direct impact on the strategy of rival teams. The most intriguing aspect of all this is that, according to sources within the paddock, the FIA is also using Verstappen's case as a catalyst for possible rule changes. The idea of introducing a more flexible scale for points penalties or even allowing a temporary amnesty after certain clean results is being discussed. In other words, Max Verstappen has become not only a driver on the verge of suspension, but also a case study that could redefine how aggression and risk-taking are judged in modern Formula One. Within the Red Bull team, Max Verstappen's situation has created a tense and unusual situation. For years, the relationship between driver and team has been one of the most stable and successful in the modern era of Formula One. Max has been the absolute center of the project, the driver around whom the team's entire technical, strategic, and communication architecture has been built. However, recent events have forced Red Bull to adopt a much more nuanced stance, in which unconditional support is beginning to give way to a more critical and pragmatic assessment. The accumulation of 11 penalty points on his super license, coupled with repeated incidents and moments of high pressure, has set off alarm bells at the highest levels within the team. Christian Horner, team principal and one of the main defenders of Verstappen's talent since his early days at Red Bull, has attempted to maintain a balance between public defense and internal measures. At a press conference, Horner described the incident with Russell as costly, but reiterated that Max's aggression is part of his competitive DNA. Behind the scenes, however, the tone is less forgiving. According to various sources close to the team, simulation sessions focused on risk management scenarios have been intensified, with the aim of training Verstappen to avoid situations that could lead to further sanctions. This type of training is unusual for a driver with 4 world titles, which speaks to the level of internal concern. This isn't about questioning his talent, but rather recognizing that the current F1 regulatory environment demands a level of calculation and control that goes beyond instinct. Meanwhile, Helmut Marko has played a key role in how Red Bull's internal response is perceived. Unlike Horner, Marko has not been shy about publicly expressing his concerns. In statements to specialized media, he stated that what happened was a serious error of judgment and that the team must re-evaluate how they handle high-pressure situations with Max. This statement marks a significant break in the official narrative. It's not simply a warning, but an open criticism that reveals fissures within the team, especially in the way their star driver's behavior is interpreted and handled. Marko has historically been a pillar in building Verstappen's image within Red Bull. That he is now speaking out so harshly indicates that something profound is changing. In addition to the emotional and strategic aspects, there is also the technical component. Although Horner has publicly insisted that no major modifications have been made to the RB21, aerodynamic data and statements leaked by team technical staff indicate otherwise. It is known that, since the Imola Grand Prix, changes have been made to the car's rear wind tunnel with the aim of improving stability in tight corners. However, the result hasn't been what he expected. The car has begun to exhibit chronic understeer, especially on hard compounds, making it more difficult to handle in high lateral load scenarios. In other words, the RB21 is no longer as predictable as before, and this has directly affected Verstappen's confidence when attacking at critical moments. Pierre Wache, the team's chief engineer, himself admitted in private conversations that the car doesn't forgive mistakes in wing configuration, which could have been a key factor in the incident with Russell. On the other hand, Verstappen hasn't issued any significant self-critical statements. His style has always been to look ahead, focus on the next race, and leave the explanations to others. However, in this context, that attitude is starting to generate more doubts than certainties. The fact that he hasn't publicly expressed any reflection on his accumulation of penalties fuels the perception that there is no real intention to adjust his approach. For many in the paddock, this lack of self-criticism can be interpreted as a sign of risk. If Verstappen doesn't change his behavior, Red Bull could be forced to make much more drastic decisions to protect its championship chances. With all this on the table, Red Bull's position has become more complex than ever. It's no longer simply a matter of managing a winning driver, but of containing an internal crisis on multiple fronts: technical, disciplinary, communicational, and above all, strategic. Because every decision made from now on, from a change in the car's design to a race order, will be conditioned by that delicate point number 12 that hangs over Max's head like a latent threat. The implications of a potential suspension for Max Verstappen go far beyond his absence from a single race. It would undoubtedly be one of the most impactful events in recent years in Formula One. For a driver of his caliber, missing a single round of the calendar would not only affect his points in the Drivers' Championship, but would also unleash a series of chain reactions that would alter the overall balance of the 2025 season. The point system in F1 is so tightly controlled at the top that any absence represents a golden opportunity for his rivals. If Max is forced to give up his seat, even for just one Grand Prix, the benefits for McLaren, Ferrari, or Mercedes would be immediate and strategically irreversible. First, the fight for the Drivers' Championship would be directly altered. Verstappen has so far been Red Bull's center of gravity, the driver who guarantees consistent results, and has proven capable of achieving maximum performance even in adverse conditions. A race without him would mean losing at least 18 to 25 potential points, which in the hands of another driver, be it Piastri or Leclerc, could completely change the championship's outlook. In a context where the gaps between teams have narrowed and margins are decided by tenths of a second, Max's absence would automatically translate into a redistribution of power within the championship. The impact on Red Bull as a team must also be considered. The Constructors' Championship is based on the combined performance of its two drivers. If one of them is sidelined due to a penalty, the team's overall points tally is jeopardized. Even with a temporary replacement, the chances of maintaining the same level of competitiveness are dramatically reduced. Red Bull would have to rely on a reserve driver. This not only creates a deficit on the track, but also forces the entire technical team to recalibrate strategies in record time. Pit decisions, car setup, tire usage, and even race communication change completely when the lead driver is not at the wheel. At the media level, Verstappen's suspension would be a media bombshell with global impact. F1 is more than a sport. It's a platform for content, entertainment, and business. And Max is, today, one of its most visible faces. His suspension due to a sanction would spark a huge debate about the fairness of the point system, the pressure on the most aggressive drivers, and the consistency of the stewards. Brands, sponsors, analysts, and fans would immediately enter into a dynamic of discussion that could further strain internal relations within Red Bull and between rival teams. Every statement would become a political weapon. Every silence a strategy. The suspension would not only be a sporting sanction, but also a narrative fracture for the season. Another point that cannot be overlooked is the psychological effect on Verstappen. Throughout his career, he has proven to be a driver who thrives on control, consistent pace, and the ability to impose his style on every lap. Losing that control due to a penalty would not only break his streak, but could alter his approach for the remainder of the season. Would he play more cautiously? Would he adjust his style? Or would he become even more aggressive in response to what he perceives as an injustice? These kinds of questions don't have simple answers, but the fact is that a penalty at this point would have profound consequences on his race mentality, and that could have as much impact as the one measured in points. Finally, there's the effect on rival teams. Without Verstappen on the track, strategic gaps open up that other teams will not hesitate to exploit. McLaren, with an increasingly solid Piastri, has already shown intentions of taking the lead if Red Bull stumbles. Ferrari, with a more balanced car than in previous years, continues to look for the right moment to break the momentum of recent championships. And Mercedes, although far from its dominant form of yesteryear, is close enough to dream of a victory if the opportunity arises. Max's absence isn't just a tactical advantage. It's a change in the playing field, an unexpected move in a season that seemed to have a defined script. With all this in perspective, it's clear that a suspension isn't limited to a driver sitting out a race. It's a profound alteration to the competitive fabric of Formula One, a real threat that jeopardizes not only Verstappen's championship, but also Red Bull's hegemony and the overall narrative of the entire season. The coming weeks will be absolutely decisive for Max Verstappen's immediate future, and by extension, for the entire 2025 season. With 11 points already on his super license, any minor error, no matter how insignificant, could mean the difference between continuing to compete or being automatically suspended. And the most worrying thing is that the two upcoming races, Canada and Austria, don't exactly offer low-risk scenarios. On the contrary, they are circuits where pressure, technical demands, and the likelihood of incidents tend to skyrocket. The Canadian Grand Prix is the first on the schedule and represents one of the most delicate challenges of the calendar for Verstappen. It's a high-speed street circuit with very close walls and intense braking zones, which has traditionally been the scene of multiple incidents. The frequent presence of a safety car is almost a guarantee, meaning that any miscalculated maneuver, any attempt to overtake in tight spaces, can result in contact. Furthermore, the weather in Montreal is unpredictable. A race that starts dry can turn chaotic in a matter of minutes if rain appears. In this context, the margin for error isn't just reduced, it becomes practically non-existent. Verstappen will have to navigate this race with a level of surgical precision, but without losing the aggressiveness that defines him. And that balance is precisely what has pushed him to the limit on so many occasions. Then comes Austria, a circuit historically favorable to Red Bull. In theory, it's its strength, its dominant terrain. But precisely because of this, the pressure is multiplied. The team is expected to arrive with the expectation of winning, of recovering points, of reasserting its authority. That pressure, which under other conditions would be motivating, could become a burden if Verstappen continues to have 11 points on his shoulders. Not to mention that 2 of his previous penalties expire on June 30th. That means that if he manages to reach that date without incident, he'll breathe easier. But if he accumulates his 12th point before that expiration, he will automatically be out of the race in Austria, a devastating blow at the most critical moment of the championship. Beyond the immediate, there is also the bigger picture to consider. Red Bull knows it cannot sustain this tension indefinitely. The team is internally evaluating how to adapt its race strategies to protect Verstappen from situations that unnecessarily expose him. This includes everything from changes to car setup to modifications to how risks are communicated from the pit wall. There are even reports that point to the possibility of giving greater tactical freedom to its second driver so that he can absorb some of the strategic pressure in the race and free Max from certain direct confrontations. It is not a definitive solution, but it is an attempt to stabilize the environment without drastically altering its competitive approach. Meanwhile, the FIA is in a critical evaluation phase of the penalty point system. Reforms that could change the way these penalties are assigned are already being discussed within the Racing Commission. There are proposals suggesting assigning differentiated values based on the severity of the infraction, or even implementing a kind of amnesty system after certain clean races. And while nothing is official yet, the fact that Verstappen is at the center of this discussion is no coincidence. His case has put the spotlight on the inconsistencies of the system and could end up being the catalyst for new regulations that better balance safety with spectacle. And if that weren't enough, there's a psychological element that can't be overlooked. Max Verstappen is known for his mental strength and his ability to stay focused under pressure. But this situation is different. Never before has he been so exposed, so closely watched, so on the brink of irreversible punishment. And although he doesn't express it publicly, the tension must be there, latent, marking every decision on the track, every braking, every overtaking. How he manages this internal pressure could mean the difference between a glorious comeback and an unexpected collapse. Everything points to us entering a critical stage of the championship. The decisions made now, both in and out of the car, will determine whether Verstappen can adapt, endure, and re-establish his dominance, or whether he will ultimately fall victim to the same intensity that propelled him to the top. In short, Max Verstappen's situation in the 2025 season isn't simply an accumulation of penalty points. It's a multifaceted crisis that combines sporting pressure, internal tensions at Red Bull, a system that isn't quite right for him, and a penalty system that now threatens to deal him a lethal blow just when he seemed to be at the peak of his maturity as a driver. The 11 points on his super license aren't just numbers, they're a reflection of a season where every decision, every maneuver, every mistake is being paid more dearly than ever. What was once a competitive advantage, his uncompromising aggressiveness, now has him walking a tightrope. The most revealing thing is that this is no longer an external perception. Verstappen's own entourage, starting with Red Bull, has begun to accept that there is a real problem. The statements from Horner and Marco, the technical review of the RB21, the internal sessions focused on risk management, all point to one fact: the team is trying to contain a situation that, if left unchanged, could cost them the championship. This isn't a story of absolute dominance. It's a story of internal struggle, of urgent adjustments, of a champion facing, for the first time in years, limits beyond his direct control. And while the breaking point hasn't yet been reached, every race from now on will be a countdown. F1 doesn't wait, it doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. If Verstappen manages to stay calm, avoid that 12th point, and refocus his season, he will not only remain in the title fight, but will have demonstrated a new dimension of his talent, the ability to evolve in real time, even under the most demanding scrutiny. But if he fails, if he crosses that line, he could lose more than a race. He could see the balance that has sustained him throughout his golden era with Red Bull compromised. The truth is, no matter what happens, all eyes are on him. Rivals are studying him. Fans are analyzing him. Stewards are keeping an eye on him. And Red Bull, for the first time in a long time, doesn't have all the answers. In this context, every qualifying session, every fast lap, every radio conversation takes on new meaning. Max Verstappen is no longer just competing against others. He's now competing against his own record, his reputation, and a set of regulations that have him cornered. And this is where you come in. What do you think about all this? Do you think Verstappen will manage to emerge from this crisis without losing his essence? Or do you think his style urgently needs to be transformed if he wants to remain at the top? Leave me your thoughts in the comments. This story is far from over, and your opinion is part of the conversation.